All right, so we can do a short reflection on the Dhamma. Right. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. So nice to see everybody here today on Tuesday, and hope that my voice doesn't sound too loud. I've got to kind of try to project it, but sometimes it doesn't sound like it's kind of yelling or anything. But yeah, it was a kind of nice week this week. There was a couple of events, some in Mississauga. Also visited Tudor and his dog Annie, which was nice. And yesterday headed down to the underground path, which often talk about, and met an old friend from university there. So I actually hadn't seen him in maybe 15 years or so, and was down there, maybe a couple months ago, and had met another friend from university who I see more regularly. And we were actually talking about this friend, and then I was walking down the path, and I hear my name, and turned around, and it was him. So he sent me a message on Facebook, actually, and said, you want to get together? So we met up in BCE place, which is where he works, which is a kind of neat place with a really cool roof. And he got some sushi, and we sat down and talked, and so he was asking me, what I've been up to the last 15 years. I was like, well, I became a monk, and and he became a businessman. So we were in kind of a business school together. And, these conversations with your old school friends eventually kind of ended up touching on kind of science and these various things, and asking me different things about Buddhism. And so one of the things that came up was he was asking me, what is it about meditation? Meditation, it can give people a lot of focus, right? And I was saying kind of, these things about psychic powers true, and it was neat, we were talking about a lot of things. And we got to talking, and I said, well, that's the interesting thing about the way that meditation is sometimes taught today, is that it's kind of like a performance enhancement tool. It's kind of like a life enhancement tool. So, in other words, whatever it is that we're doing, kind of meditation makes it better, And paradoxically, when I was young, they used to say the same thing about marijuana. Whatever you're doing is a lot better if you're all of a sudden your food tastes better, and your jokes are funnier, and you sleep more deeply. And now they say the same thing about meditation. It kind of enhances your performance. If you're a salesperson, he's in sales, which the way he described it, he's in recruitment, and it's kind of sounded like a pretty intense business from what he was describing. And kind of meditation you get taught as this kind of like performance enhancement tool. In other words, you just keep paying really close attention to what you're doing every moment, and you'll be less stressed, and you'll be able to produce more quality work. And there is a kind of truth to that. Of course, if you pay really close attention to every detail of what we're doing, then the results are going to be better than if we had our attention focused on what we were doing, maybe just a few seconds out of every minute. The rest of the time we're kind of on autopilot. But the interesting thing that came out of that was we were discussing this and said, well, the thing is, this gets taught as like something that can enhance all these aspects of your life, but what doesn't get taught often is this aspect of karma. In other words, you can think that meditation will be continually enhancing your aspects of your life, but if we start to turn our minds to an evil purpose, then all of a sudden, one day we find that our meditation stops working. That's something that they don't describe a lot in these various, in the way that, it's great that meditation is spreading, right? But that part of it hasn't reached the knowledge of the general culture yet. In other words, there's a kind of ethical element to meditation, and it isn't just tacked on. If we want our minds to advance in skillful abilities, then this is the basis. It's kind of like, I often take these kind of GO trains, and these trains have these kind of tracks. And if you flip the track, then no matter how much you want the train to go straight, it'll follow that track, the direction that the track was flipped. And in the same way, we have these kind of evil intentions. The train goes for a bit, but eventually it hits the curve and it'll turn right. It won't keep going straight. And so then his response to that was, well, okay, that's fine, but I see like people in professions, and they're very unethical, and it's these kind of unethical people who get ahead. They're kind of willing to go the distance. It was an interesting conversation. So I said, one of the things I said to him was, well, it's unfortunate because he's in business, and I was like, now business people are seen as really evil. I don't think it always used to be that way. Like, business people used to be kind of valued members of the community, seen as philanthropists, and now people do these evil things. And what ends up happening is that people stop trusting one another. And kind of these values that people have in their workplace, these kind of things, well, I've just got to be ruthless to get ahead. I've got to be evil to get ahead. That kind of comes home with them. They stop trusting people, stop thinking the world is a bright place. It's because they're just immersed in this environment where it's cutthroat, like you have to cheat somebody to get ahead. So I remember there was this movie before I ordained, which was called The Devil Wears Prada. Probably a bunch of people saw it here. I think it won some Academy Awards. And in this movie, it was all about this kind of like high-stakes fashion industry. And the top woman on top, she was, I think she was a spoof for a real-life figure whose name wouldn't say in Dhamma talks. But anyways, the climax of this movie, this lady she was working with this top lady, this really top lady in fashion. And in order to get ahead at the end, this top lady put her in a position where she had to betray somebody if she wanted to get ahead. She wanted to keep her job. And so she did. She betrayed this person. And then at the very end of the movie, this top lady is about to lose her job, but she betrays her most loyal employee. Her most loyal employee was about to get this really good job for a new fashion company that was starting up. And the owner of the company she worked for wanted to fire her and replace her with this woman from France. But she kind of manipulated things, so this woman from France got the job her really loyal employee was going to get. So she kind of gave him the axe. And that was what it took for her to keep the job. And so that was what she was trying to teach this woman. And so, of course, you can do that kind of thing short term. Short term can get these kind of these gains by kind of cutting people out, by doing these kind of evil things. But eventually this kind of spreads through society and people become suspicious. So there's, I know being in school, there's these kind of proverbial example of these kind of vacuum cleaner salesmen. These when, back in the maybe 50s, I think, I see it now being among the Sri Lankan community more often. You go to people's houses, there's like tons of people there. They'll like invite you in, and there's just this feeling of openness and, quite a lot of hospitality and a lot of warmth. It's actually really beautiful to see. Actually, just at this kind of gathering on Sunday, there was maybe like 80 people who came for a 1-year death anniversary. which, I was kind of in awe, right? It's something normal. And in Western society at one point as well, I think, people had this idea of hospitality. And not to say that it's totally gone, but people were very kind of more open with their homes. So a new person would come to the neighborhood and you would go knock on their door and bring like a pie and then invite them in, and, they got to be part of the community. And then eventually these people, this might be an influencing factor, these kind of salesmen started going door to door, among other things. And when they went, the people would let them in. And they started putting a lot of pressure on these people to buy vacuums. These vacuum cleaner salesmen were the kind of proverbial high-pressure salesmen. And eventually be like, okay, well, don't know if I need a vacuum now. Thank you very much. And, they'd be going to leave. And then the vacuum cleaner salesman would, put their foot in the door. Couldn't close the door and get these people out of your house. And so now, when people show up to your door, the immediate feeling is suspicion. It's kind of a salesman shows up. It's like, what do you want? What are you trying to cheat me with? And then this kind of attitude spreads out into people's relationships with others. When somebody sees somebody they don't know, the immediate thought is like, what do you want from me? Like, what are you trying to get? And it's also kind of seen as something good to do. What can I get from this person? This is also another kind of theme that unfortunately spread through corporations. There was this movie, Wall Street, I think, which said it really well. This idea that greed is really good. In other words, kind of being as greedy as possible will get you the most money, and that keeps the economy going. It's kind of evil attitudes. And of course, short term, that can work. So in this movie, this guy would buy these companies that were doing, well, had good employees, good investments. They were employing a lot of people. He would buy them up, and then he would break them into all these component pieces and sell them off. So in other words, he would destroy all these people's jobs and their livelihood, and kind of make a lot of money doing that. But then, of course, eventually people become wise to this. A person's ability to short-term take things from people like that goes away when these feelings of goodwill dissipate and people become kind of suspicious. And then when that happens in society, then people start to become isolated and they can become depressed. Kind of live in a city with a million people, 2 million people, and you can feel like you don't have any friends, right? Kind of go to a village in India and people invite you into their house. If they're sick, it's like, what do you need? I actually went to my friend's house in India one time, and it was like, you can stay, you have her, keep staying. I met them once, and then I met them again. They're like, when you go to Sri Lanka, come to our house in India. You can stay with us. It was kind of this, just this assumption that if you know somebody, it's good to be hospitable. So that was one of the things that came out of the conversation, that short term, these kind of things can bring us a short-term benefit. In other words, being kind of evil, being ruthless, seems like it gets ahead, but long-term, that kind of spreads and makes people depressed. And his response to that was, well, okay, that might be true for society, but I don't see that with these people. Actually, they kind of, they go through their life and they seem to keep doing better. So this kind of a proverbial example is like these people who caused this Wall Street crash. In other words, they lifted a lot of the banking restrictions in the States. This happens in like cycles where people will think, okay, there's too many restrictions, let's lift these restrictions, and all of a sudden, all these companies' stock prices start rising. These kind of investment restrictions get lifted, but what's actually happening is people are taking out a lot of debt. They're spending money, people get excited, and the stock price of the company goes up. And then more people get excited by the rise in the price, and they spend more money. They go into more debt. So there's all this kind of excitement fueled by debt. And then eventually some people realize, wait a minute, this company isn't worth that much money. And then the price crashes, and the economy goes to shambles. But he said the people at the top in that situation, they got out with these golden parachutes. They made like billions of dollars for the short-term gains that they got, which were written into their contract. And so what I said to him was, well, that may be true. That might be a true thing, that people who do these cutthroat things, they themselves might gain short term. But in Buddhism, there is this kind of law of karma. In other words, there are consequences to that. You don't get away with doing an evil thing. It comes back to you. Sometimes immediately. Although these people might have gotten away with $1 million, $1 billion, it's not sure what's going on in the minds of these people. Actually, I remember hearing about the World War II veterans, some of them who had to kill many people and saw terrible atrocities. And these people, when they came back, they had huge parades for them. And they were basically heroes in the country. But then later on, many of the stories that came from their children were that these people were haunted by memories of what they'd done. In other words, these kind of things stay with us. The people who have done terrible things for short-term gain, that affects their mind, in the present. And then I said, well, after death, that's a kind of type of becoming. The actions that they've taken have a momentum, and that carries on after death. These kind of short-term gains. And so he said, well, I don't really believe that. And I said, well, fair enough. You can't prove it like that. But the nice thing about the Buddhist teachings is that all these things, this kind of thing that we see happening on a large scale in the economy, people going for short-term gains, and it's spreading out into long-term problems. This kind of thing that we see in our own life, when we go for a short-term happiness at the expense of a long-term one, we suffer big. These are actually a principle. It's actually a law. So it's something we don't actually need to see people dying and reborn to get a kind of sense of how it works. And this is why we don't have to go to the complete ends that a Buddha does to get the total knowledge that a Buddha does. All of the Buddha's teachings, what we need to know, are available to see in the patterns of our own experience. This is the interesting thing. So oftentimes in the meditation class, when questions come up, when discussions come up, it's often just about this, that there are these two principles that compete with each other. There's this one principle where things we can get short-term bring us a lot of happiness short-term, bring us a lot of pleasure, like material wealth, material gains, whatever it is, short-term, but they bring us long-term dissatisfaction. And then there's things that bring us short-term dissatisfaction, but a lot of long-term happiness. It seems simple to understand, right? But it's difficult to do. But the nice thing about these things is that not only do they happen in our experience, wherever we look in the world, these teachings are applicable. We see these patterns in the economy. We see these patterns in a person's workplace. And then, when we look, we see these patterns in our own mind. So when a person practices in this way, constantly looking for the patterns in nature, constantly looking for the causes and effects that lead to happiness, they start to see them for themselves. And that's a knowledge that people can't take away from them. So this was one of the kind of last things that I said to him. I was like, well, as a monk, you wouldn't really kind of go into a corporation and be like, okay, everybody, here I am. I got past security. By the way, everybody who does bad things is going to suffer from it. People aren't ready to hear that, right? It has to be the case that the people who want to learn come looking for it themselves. Excuse me. And this is why there's that famous phrase, that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. In other words, these principles are always here. The path to happiness, the path of practice, the path to seeing cause and effect, it's there. It's here in this room, it's there in our workplace, it's there in our economy. But our ability to see it comes from this desire, comes from starting to see these things happening in our life ourselves. So, for the example, my friend who is there, or friends who've talked to me in the past, they can see sometimes, look, I've made a lot of money here, but I'm not that satisfied. Why is that? I've done bad things. Well, not that he did this guy, but other people, may I've done bad things to get ahead. But I'm still not satisfied. Why is that? When these kind of questions come up in a person's mind, when these kind of searches come up in a person's mind, that's when they're ready to see these kind of things. That's when these things are ready to penetrate. So this is why it's not necessary, actually, for everybody to kind of be able to have psychic powers to see rebirth happening. All these kind of principles, all the things that the Buddha talks about, the laws for them are available right here, in this room, in our workplace, in our own mind. So long as we become sensitive enough to seek the answer, so long as we have that desire, and so long as we start to look, that's when we start to see. And when we see these things, that's when we gain confidence. That's when we gain this kind of faith. And that was the kind of last thing that we talked about, actually, was kind of faith, because it ended up touching on various religious topics. And, this kind of thing, this faith, is something that's present in Buddhism. In other words, we don't have to learn everything that the Buddha knew, We don't have to totally become like Buddhas ourselves. But it stems from having enough confidence, enough faith. In the same way, we don't have to totally know how our car works to use it, We have enough faith in our car because we've seen cars work, airplanes work, we've seen people jump into and out of cars, we've turned the key ourselves, the car has started, We've heard about an engine, heard about the way it works. So now every time we see a car, we have faith. We get in the car and we turn the key, and we know what we need to use it for, which is to drive. And so the same thing can happen from this kind of investigation into these principles that are here right now, is that we gain faith. It stops having to be the case, actually, when we were talking, me and my friend and I, like everything we talked about, of course, first starting to learn about it, it's like, why is that, Like he went to get the sushi, he's like, can you eat afternoon? No. Why? Like, can't handle money? Why? Can't, wait a minute, there's rebirth? I don't accept that proposition. Why? And all these whys are actually important questions to ask. But when we search for them enough, when we see these principles, some of our answers start to get answered. Some of these things come up as answers for us. And then the need to ask why for everything starts to fall away. It's like a person who doesn't need to know how every aspect of their car works before they get in and drive it, In other words, we've seen enough of these wholesome qualities that we start to have faith in building them ourselves. When we have that faith and we start building these qualities, our abilities spread out more. The more we see, the more our faith grows. So in other words, this type of training, this training that the Buddha provides us, can accelerate. It starts small. It starts from these simple principles. Look, this will give me short-term happiness, long-term pain. This will give me short-term pain, long-term happiness. We start to practice with that. We practice with that. We see it. We learn a lot about the principles in our own life, in our own mind, and also externally. But it spreads out from that. More and more things we gain the ability to confirm. And once we have this kind of ability, we start to see these principles, it accelerates. It doesn't just stay at this kind of same pace. Our faith accelerates, our abilities accelerate, and our skill, what we might call driving the car, accelerates. And this is when a lot of these questions like why this, why that, how that fall away. We get rid of some of these kind of fetters of doubt. This fetter of doubt that makes us want to stop the car at every single intersection, every turn, go down it. Eventually it's just like, how do I get there? Let's go. But it can start from conversations like that me and my friend had, especially for Westerners. Not that he's a Buddhist or going to become one, but asking these questions, Why can't I eat afternoon? Why is it that people who seem really ruthless get ahead? And people who don't seem ruthless don't seem to get ahead. How does that fit into the Buddhist teachings? Learning to investigate these things, we see the principles that the Buddha taught. And when we see these things for ourselves, then we can go. Don't have to worry so much anymore about stopping at every turn.